right, so here we are working on our truss tower project. You can see it's a slightly broken, but more or less an example truss. It's only green so I could tell it was an example as it's written right here and not a student's work. But you can see it's got 4 sides. It stands about 8 inches tall. It's about 2.5 inches from side to side here, about 2.25 inches this way. And to make one of these towers, obviously you need 4 sides. And what we're going to do is build 2 of these sides, 2 of these trusses, and then connect them with the connecting sides. Okay? I just wanted you to kind of get an idea of what the final output is. All right? But for a starting point, I'm going to give you an example tower truss design. You're going to tape it down on all 4 corners on one of these boards. Your board might look a little different than this. You want to make sure it's nice and smooth, that there's no wrinkles, that there's no lumps underneath it. Lumps are bad for building good towers. Now, the next step we're going to do, because we need to make 2 of these sides. In fact, I've got some that aren't kind of painted green there. That's easier to see. There's an example that a student made. And that student, since he was building a tower, needed to make 2 sides exactly the same. You can see if I lay these on top of each other, they're almost identical. Okay, so we would call that symmetrical. All right, very good. If I start gluing my balsa wood pieces onto this piece of paper, obviously it's going to stick to the paper. I'm going to tear the paper when I pull my truss piece off. So what we're going to do is put a piece of wax paper over them. Now, some of you may have used wax paper in baking things like cookies in order to keep them from sticking to a pan. So I'll take a little piece of tape, and just like I did with the paper drawing, I'm going to put a little piece of tape on each one of these corners, smooth it out nice and flat. Now this wax paper is not pretty, it's not perfect, but as long as it covers my drawing, it doesn't need to cover like this whole piece of paper, or certainly not this whole board. Can't really see down here. I'm smoothing this out nice and smooth. I suppose if I had to put another piece of tape somewhere up here to keep it from curling up, I could, but usually not necessary. But there, you get the idea. So now, because it's wax paper, you can see right through it, all right? And let's say that I glue all these pieces to it and it sticks to the wax paper. No big deal. I just tear off the wax paper. I still have my original design underneath. Odds are, if you're careful, you'll be able to pluck this guy off carefully, kind of using a little ruler or something like as a spatula to unstick it from the wax paper. And you might even be able to use the same piece of wax paper again. All right. Couple of things. All right. And this is kind of like tech ed vocabulary. This piece here, this kind of whole section with all these diagonals is called a truss. Now, the world is built out of trusses. If you look up in a Walmart or a Home Depot or the Excel Center in Hartford or something like that, the roof is almost always held on by trusses. Highway signs, the towers that hold our electric wires, they're all over if you take a minute to start to notice them, okay? Another thing you might notice about this truss is it's built up of a bunch of pieces, and these pieces on the side are definitely wider. They are thicker pieces or wider pieces. They're the same thickness. You can see that's all the same thickness all the way through. The wider pieces are actually called beams, okay? So the whole thing is a truss. These 2 side guys are beams, all right? These skinnier pieces that go mostly from side to side, some don't quite go all the way across, those are smaller pieces called members, okay? So far we've got trusses, the whole thing, beams on the side, members going across, and where the glue is, where the members join, either the beam or another member, those are called joints, just like we have our knee joint and our elbow joint where the upper and lower parts of our bones meet. Those are joints. So those are words you're going to hear me use in this quite a bit. All right. So the first thing I have to do to make such a truss as this is get my 2 beams. And your teacher will probably already have them cut to length for you. They should be 8 inches long because that's what the drawing is. And I'm just going to lay them there. Now, I don't want these guys to wiggle while I'm working. So what I'm going to do is take some tape, and I'm going to peel off some very tiny pieces of tape, about that big, okay? And I'm going to find a spot where I'm not going to have a glue joint. In other words, if I put my piece of tape right here, you can see I'm going to glue a member there eventually. That would be a terrible place for that piece of tape. It's going to get stuck inside of all my glue. I'll never be able to peel that tape off. Right out here, there's nothing. So that's a good place for a piece of tape. Here's another good place. One kind of near the top-ish, one kind of near the bottom. Make sure that guy is relatively straight. And of course, do the same on the other side. So what I did was I took a large piece of tape and tore it into 4 tiny little pieces of tape. That's a little too tiny. But if your pieces of tape are too big, they just tend to get in your way, all right? For right now, we want to make sure that these beams are good, okay? In fact, I can see this one here is a little bit shorter, and that kind of bums me out. I'm going to see if I can find another piece real quick. Even being off by a little bit can make a difference on your tower. Ah, that looks better. This one here. So I'm going to peel this guy up, borrow those pieces of tape, double check and make sure that when I look at this, the ends are even. Remember, we talked about symmetry before, things being the same. If things are uneven, they tend to be weaker. Okay, that's pretty cool. So now that I have these pieces taped down, every single design, by the way, this is Truss Tower design number 1. I think I have 4 or 5 different designs you're going to be given that you can choose from. So everyone's going to be a little different, but I guarantee there's going to be a piece at the top and bottom, or bottom and top, however you want to look at it. So I'm always going to need one of those, all right? So let's talk about cutting our balsa. Dun, 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 dun. The balsa chopper, okay? It's got a little push button here. When you push down, there's a blade inside. You can kind of see the razor blade. See if I can orient this a little bit better for you guys to see. And this guy goes down and cuts the balsa. In fact, you can kind of see right here there's a bit of a ledge. So if I push my balsa stick right up against that ledge, I know I get a nice 90-degree corner. Line it up and cut. And there's my piece of balsa. All right. So what I'm going to do with a nice sharp pencil is line it up on the inside. By the inside, I mean in between these two guys. And then I'm just going to make a pencil mark here. Now, one thing I'll tell you guys is if you cut it too small, you can never put it back on. So what I would do is cut it maybe a little bit big, and we can always snip a tiny little bit more off. We call that nibbling. Okay. And let's see if I can move this up a little bit so you can see my chopper. I move my chopper in here. I line it right up with my blade. But it's hard to see sometimes when you're old. All right, so I cut that. It is a tiny bit too big. I can probably squish it right in there. Not bad, okay? Once again, I don't want that guy to wiggle when I go to glue it. So I'm going to take a teeny tiny little piece of tape somewhere where there isn't a joint, tape that guy down. Do the same thing at the top. Take my stick, get it close. Here, I'll see if I can zoom in a little bit. Get it close. Make a little pencil mark. Bring my balsa cutter here. Line it right up against here. And like most things, the first time you do it, you might have a little difficulty. With practice, you'll get better. You'll become more accurate. You'll become faster. Yeah, that one's way too big. See how it's pushing my drawing, my beam off my drawing? So that tells me I need to nibble off a little bit more. So we push that guy back a little bit and just snip off a teeny tiny little bit. I bet you it fits better now. There we go. Super. That's a little better. Tight. Another trick I can do is if I have a piece of sandpaper nearby. Balsa wood is incredibly soft. So if I just put my piece of sandpaper on the board and drag it just a tiny little bit, it's going to take off a little bit of my balsa there. Oh, now it fits sweet. Look at that. Nice and even. My beams are still over the pattern there. Take a little tiny piece of tape and tape this guy down. Okay? Now, certainly, we're not going to use the tape to hold our tower together. We're going to use wood glue, which is actually super strong. Okay? Wood glue is actually stronger than wood once it's dry. All right? We're not going to take our glue bottle and pour our glue directly on the joint. That's going to make a huge mess. And there's a thing we call glue boogers. In other words, sometimes when somebody gets a little too excited with their glue bottle, you can see these big, ugly, brown globs, okay? There's one, and there's one, okay? Not too neat, and probably not that strong, okay? What we want here is a nice tight connection, no spaces, no gaps. And what I'll do is take a little bit of glue, squirt some on the side, maybe about the size of a nickel or a penny, not too much. I can always put more there later. And I'm going to take an extra little piece of balsa. I'll just break one off of this stick here. I'll take something like this and I'll kind of scoop it. And I'm almost using this like a glue paintbrush and kind of dabbing it on that corner. I'm trying to get that glue to hold that joint together. Just like that. If I zoom in a little bit, there you can see what the glue joint looks like. Okay? I'll do the same thing at the top. Dip, dip. Kind of scoop that glue up there. See, I'm kind of dragging it away, and a little bit of glue is getting down there in that corner. Now, glue takes a decent amount of time to dry. Usually in the old days, when we had 43-minute periods, we used to tell people to let it dry overnight after you glued a few pieces. If you have the longer block periods, like we do when I'm making this video, then you might want to glue a few pieces and wait, 25 minutes or so. That means you could probably cut and glue some other pieces later on in the period. All right. Now, in this particular design, every design's a little different. But you can see I've got a piece here, and a piece here, and a piece here. I call those horizontal because they go side to side like the horizon. All right, so I can look at that, make my little thing. By the way, you can see I'm being careful not to stick my hand in the glue. Glue's not, like poison. I wouldn't drink it, certainly. You don't want to get it on your clothes, for sure. I've had people drag their hair through it. That's kind of gross. Certainly, people have dragged their sleeves through it. You just kind of want to pay attention to what's going on, and that you don't get glue all over yourself. Let me snip that off a little bit more. Again, we call this nibbling. Oh, you know what? I'll use my sandpaper. I'll use my sandpaper trick here. Give it a quick little drag here. Oh, yeah, so nice. Okay. Measure, cut another one. I'm going to see if I can get all of these guys. And then there will probably be a part 2 of this video where I cut the angles, because that's another kind of a whole other thing. Whew, got it right the first time. Look at that. All right, so once again, a little piece of tape. Wouldn't put it over here because that would be in the way. Doesn't have to be anything fancy or pretty. Just has to be enough tape that it's going to hold it down, keep it from wiggling while the glue dries. Once the glue is dry, we don't have to worry too much about it. Okay? Remember, one of the reasons I'm making this video is because your teacher's probably going to be in the other side of the classroom in the wood shop, talking with the students in there, supervising them using power tools. So they're not going to be running back in here every time you have a question about how to do something. No, that's too small. All right. So anyway, I've got these guys in here. Make sure they're nice and straight, just like I did before. Dab some glue. And through the magic of video editing, by the time we get to the next segment, I bet all 5 of these pieces will be in here. You can see I'm just about out of glue from that original pile. Glue's not cheap. And the more glue you put on your tabletop, your project here, the more likely it is you're going to make a mess. So you can always go back and add a little more. I'm kind of getting just enough out of here, but if I wanted to, I could add a little tiny bit more. But that's about all the more glue you want to put on at any one time. You guys will be sharing those glue bottles. All right? So again, if I zoom in a little bit, you can kind of see those glue joints way up front, right on top of them. All right? So now, if I were to get this piece cut and glued as well, I would say that would be a good time for us to stop and let those pieces of balsa dry, and then we'd go on to cutting some angles. All right, so part 2 of this video will start in just a few minutes.